The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and cheap coffee, the kind that had been reheated too many times. People moved past us without looking, lawyers in dark suits, clerks holding folders, strangers with their own problems. It felt like any other weekday morning except my sister stood directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the thin line of irritation around her mouth. Vanessa Turner had always known how to take up space. She stood tall, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted like the building itself belonged to her. She wore a fitted blazer, the kind that said, confidence without saying a word. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared, ready, almost cheerful. Well, she said, glancing at her watch, then back at me. This didn't take as long as I thought. I didn't answer. I kept my hands folded in front of me and waited. Silence had never made me uncomfortable. If anything, it usually made other people talk more. Vanessa stepped closer. I just want to be clear, she said, lowering her voice. After today, I'm done pretending. I stayed. I handled everything. And now I'm taking what's mine. She paused like she wanted the moment to land properly. I'm taking everything from you. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The words were clean, sharp, and confident. This wasn't anger. This was ownership. For a second, she studied my face, searching for something. Fear, maybe. Shock. A crack. She'd always enjoyed that part. When we were kids, she used to take my toys, just to see if I'd cry. When I didn't, she'd take another one. I gave her nothing. Her mouth curved into a small smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. You always did have that blank look, she said. I never knew if you were thinking or if there was just nothing going on in there. I looked at her then. Really looked. Same hair she'd had for years, perfectly styled. Same earrings she wore to every important meeting. She hadn't changed much. She still believed proximity meant ownership. That staying meant control. You walked away, she continued. You chose the military. You chose not to be here. And that choice has consequences. Behind her, her attorney stood a few feet back, scrolling through his phone, relaxed. He glanced up once, gave me a quick look, then went back to whatever message mattered more. To him, this was routine. Another family dispute. Another quiet sibling who didn't understand how things worked. Vanessa leaned in slightly. This is the best thing that could have happened, she said. I finally get to clean this up. I heard footsteps beside me and felt someone stop at my shoulder. My attorney didn't look at Vanessa. He didn't acknowledge her at all. He focused on me. Did you do exactly what I said? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. He nodded once. Good. Vanessa's smile widened. She thought the conversation was over. She thought she'd already won. The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff called our case. People shifted. Papers rustled. Vanessa straightened her jacket and took a step away from me, already moving toward the room like she owned it. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than the hallway, the kind of cold that settled into your bones. The judge hadn't arrived yet. The room buzzed with low voices and shuffling feet. Vanessa chose her seat without hesitation, front row center. She placed her bag neatly at her feet and crossed her legs, comfortable, confident, at home. I sat where my attorney indicated a few seats back. Not hidden, just not performing. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder. I hope you're not expecting sympathy, she said. This isn't that kind of story. I almost laughed. Almost. The judge entered and everyone stood. When we sat again, the noise faded. The room tightened like it always does when authority walks in. The judge reviewed the file briefly, then looked up. Let's begin, she said. Vanessa's attorney stood first. He spoke smoothly, clearly practiced. He described Vanessa as the responsible one, the daughter who stayed, the sister who managed the family business when things got hard, the one who handled medical appointments, payroll contracts, and everything else while I was gone. She made sacrifices, he said. She kept everything running. Vanessa nodded along, her expression serious now, almost noble. Then he turned his attention to me. My client's sister chose a different path, he continued. She left. She built a career elsewhere. She was absent for years. And now she wants to return and claim ownership over decisions she wasn't here to make. Vanessa's lips pressed together in something that looked a lot like satisfaction. The judge listened without interrupting. When my attorney stood, he didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue the story yet. He simply acknowledged it. There's no dispute that Ms. Turner served in the military, he said. There's no dispute that Ms. Turner managed aspects of the family business. What we're here to discuss is not effort or intent. It's authority, it's records, and it's responsibility. Vanessa shifted slightly in her chair. The judge nodded once. "We'll get there," she said. "But first I want to hear the full background." Vanessa took that as her cue. She spoke confidently, detailing years of work, long nights, difficult choices. She talked about doctor's visits, emergency calls, contracts signed under pressure. She talked about me as if I were a distant relative, someone who sent occasional checks but didn't understand what it took to actually hold things together. "I didn't do this to hurt her," Vanessa said, her voice steady. "I did it because someone had to." She looked at me when she said it, daring me to disagree. "I didn't." My attorney took a note. One line, then another. The judge asked a few questions, clarifying questions. Dates, roles, authority. Vanessa answered quickly, confidently, sometimes a little too quickly. When she finished, she leaned back, exhaled, and glanced at me again. There it was, that look she'd worn since we were kids. The look that said, "You're done." My attorney stood again. "Your Honor," he said calmly. "Before we respond, we'd like to submit several documents into the record." Vanessa's attorney frowned. Just for a moment. The bailiff stepped forward to collect the folder. Vanessa didn't look worried. She crossed her arms and waited. I sat still, listening to the faint hum of the lights above us, feeling the weight of the room settle in. This wasn't the first time I'd been in a place where everyone assumed they knew how things would end. I'd learned a long time ago that confidence without verification was just noise. My attorney glanced at me once more, just long enough for me to see the corner of his mouth lift slightly. The judge opened the folder, flipped to the first page, and began to read. The judge's eyes moved across the first page, then the second, her expression unreadable. I watched Vanessa shift in her seat just a fraction, as if adjusting for comfort. That small movement pulled me backward, not to a memory but to a pattern. The way she always adjusted when she thought she had the upper hand. We grew up in the same house, but we learned early that space didn't mean equality. Vanessa was 4 years older, louder, quicker to speak. She learned how to interrupt adults before I learned how to finish a sentence. By the time I figured out that waiting my turn didn't guarantee one, she'd already mastered the art of talking, until people nodded just to make her stop. Our parents didn't mean to create sides. They just responded to volume. Vanessa had questions, opinions, complaints. I had answers, but I kept them to myself unless asked. Most days, no one asked. When Vanessa wanted something, she explained why she deserved it. When I wanted something, I waited until it was convenient for everyone else. That difference didn't look like much at the time. It added up anyway. She stayed close to home. That was her story, and she told it often. Close enough to help with groceries, close enough to handle paperwork, close enough to become the default decision maker without ever being formally appointed. I left for college, then left again for training. I sent money home. I called when I could. I missed birthdays and holidays, and the kind of quiet emergencies that never make it into family updates. Vanessa noticed all of it. Every absence became evidence. Every missed dinner became a point she could collect and spend later. When I told the family I was joining the military, she didn't argue. She smiled. That was worse. Well, she said someone has to stay and deal with real life. She said it like a joke. Everyone laughed. I did too. It was easier that way. Real life, according to Vanessa, happened in the same zip code you were born in. It happened at kitchen tables and doctors' offices, and during phone calls you couldn't ignore. Real life didn't come with uniforms or deployments or rules written down in binders. Real life was messy, emotional, and according to her, required a certain kind of personality, hers. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain that the military didn't erase responsibility. It reorganized it. That accountability didn't disappear just because it came with acronyms and procedures. I learned early that explaining my choices only gave her more material. While I trained, she stepped into roles no one officially assigned her. She started helping with the business, then she started handling it. Then she started introducing herself as the one in charge. By the time anyone noticed the shift, it felt awkward to question it. She liked to remind people how much she'd given up. Nights out, vacations, opportunities. She never mentioned what she gained. Influence, access, the ability to shape the narrative before anyone else could speak. I didn't see most of it happening. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because I trusted the system. In my world, roles were defined. Authority was written down. If someone was in charge, there was paperwork to prove it. If they weren't, there were limits. Family didn't work like that. When I came home on leave, Vanessa would update me quickly, efficiently, like a project briefing she'd already summarized. Everything's fine, she'd say. Handled. She didn't invite questions, she didn't offer documents, she offered reassurance, and most people confuse that with transparency. Our parents leaned on her more as they got older, not because she was better, but because she was there. Proximity became trust. Trust became habit. Habit became assumption. I didn't challenge it, at first. I told myself there was no reason to. The business was still running. The bills were paid. The numbers, at least the ones I saw, made sense. And whenever I asked for something specific, Vanessa delivered it quickly, like she'd been expecting the request. See, she'd say, nothing to worry about. I learned a lot in the military about how people behave when they think they're being observed. I learned even more about how they behave when they think they aren't. Vanessa was careful around me. She always had been. Not because she feared me, but because she knew I noticed details she preferred to keep blurry. Back in the courtroom, she spoke about those years like they were a badge of honor, sacrifice, responsibility, burden. She framed herself as the only adult in the room, the one who stayed when I left. She never mentioned that I sent money every month. She never mentioned that I paid for repairs equipment, emergency expenses. She never mentioned the conversations we had where she asked for help and I provided it without conditions. Those details didn't fit her version. The judge asked her about the early years, the period before any formal authority was granted. Vanessa answered confidently but vaguely. She talked about understanding and family expectations. She talked about doing what needed to be done. The judge nodded, then asked another question. Dates this time. Specifics. Vanessa hesitated, just long enough to notice. My attorney didn't react. He wrote something down. I remembered the first time Vanessa used the phrase "someone had to." It was years ago during a conversation about expanding the business. She'd already spoken to a vendor, already negotiated terms, already decided the outcome. When I asked why she hadn't looped me in, she shrugged. Someone had to make the call, she said. That phrase had carried her a long way. In my world, someone had to was never enough. Someone had to be authorized. Someone had to be accountable. Someone had to answer for the consequences. Vanessa's confidence came from repetition. She'd been telling the same story for so long that it sounded like fact even to her. She stayed. I left. Therefore, she decided. End of discussion. I watched her now as the judge turned another page. The smile was gone. Not replaced by fear, just calculation. She was adjusting again, mentally rearranging pieces, preparing to pivot if needed. That was always her strength. Adaptation through narrative. I sat still, listening to the scrape of paper, the quiet murmur of the courtroom, the sound of a system designed to care less about stories and more about proof. This wasn't about who felt more invested. It wasn't about who spoke louder or stayed closer. It was about what could be shown line by line, without interpretation. Vanessa glanced at me once more, searching my face for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I focused on the judge's hands as she separated one document from the stack and set it aside. That small movement carried more weight than any speech I'd heard so far. The judge set the document down and reached for a pen, and the soft click echoed louder than it should have. I felt my shoulders ease a fraction, the way they always did when a checklist moved from pending to complete. Across the aisle, Vanessa crossed her legs again. Slower this time, careful not to look unsettled. I learned that posture in uniform. The habit of controlling what your body says when your mouth stays quiet. I joined the military because it made sense, not as a statement, not to escape. I liked systems that worked the same way every time you followed the rules. I liked roles that came with definitions instead of expectations. I liked knowing where authority started and ended. Training stripped away noise fast. You learn early that confidence without preparation doesn't survive inspection. You also learn that nobody cares how hard you think you're working. They care about output, accuracy, accountability. I gravitated toward logistics and financial management because numbers don't argue back. They either line up or they don't. There's no room for interpretation when a decimal point is in the wrong place. No one accepts I meant well when funds are missing. Vanessa hated that part whenever I tried to explain it. That's not how family works, she'd say. You can't treat people like spreadsheets. I never said you could. I just learned what happens when you don't track things properly. While I was learning federal budgeting rules and compliance standards, Vanessa was learning something else. She was learning how to speak for the room, how to answer questions before anyone else could, how to present decisions as inevitable instead of optional. We were both becoming very good at what we did. The difference was visibility. On base, my work spoke quietly but carried weight. Audits passed, reports balanced. Problems were caught early because someone asked the right question at the right time. I didn't get applause for that. I got more responsibility. At home, Vanessa got applause. She showed up to meetings. She talked to vendors. She knew everyone's name. She told stories about how hard things were and how she managed anyway. People nodded. People trusted her. Trust multiplied when it wasn't challenged. When I came home on leave, she treated me like a guest. Polite, cordial, slightly distant. She'd give me updates the way you brief someone who didn't need details. Everything's handled, she'd say. You don't need to worry about it. She said that a lot. It sounded comforting. It wasn't meant to be inclusive. I didn't push back because at the time, nothing seemed broken. The business was still operating. The staff was still paid. Our parents seemed reassured by her presence. And I was bound by duty schedules and deployments that didn't care about family meetings. Military life doesn't pause because someone back home needs clarification. You learn to compartmentalize. You learn to trust that people you leave behind will handle what they say they're handling. Vanessa understood that advantage instinctively. She learned which questions our parents didn't like. She learned how to frame problems so that she already looked like the solution. She learned how to use urgency as leverage. Someone had to decide now. Someone had to sign today. Someone had to step up. That someone was always her. When our parents' health started to decline, the pattern intensified. Doctor appointments multiplied. Paperwork thickened. Decisions stacked up. Vanessa was there for all of it. I wasn't. Not physically. I asked for copies. She sent summaries. I asked for statements. She sent reassurances. Each time it felt reasonable. Each time I told myself it was temporary. Each time the distance between information and authority widened just enough to matter. Back in the courtroom, the judge asked about those years. Not emotionally, factually. What was your role during this period, she asked Vanessa. Vanessa answered without hesitation. I managed operations. I handled finances. I made decisions when no one else could. And your sister, the judge asked, glancing at me. Vanessa didn't look over this time. She was serving elsewhere. The word elsewhere carried weight, vague, dismissive, convenient. My attorney let the silence sit for a second longer than necessary. In my experience, silence either makes people clarify or commit. Vanessa chose the second. I'm not saying she didn't contribute at all, Vanessa added. But someone has to be present to lead. Presence, another word she liked. Presence meant authority to her. If you were there, you decided. If you weren't, you forfeited. In my world, presence without authorization meant nothing. You could be standing right next to a system and still have no permission to change it. The judge scribbled something in the margin. I thought about the nights I spent reviewing budgets that weren't mine, catching discrepancies before they became problems for someone else. The hours spent learning how money moves through layers of approval, how easily it can be misused when no one is watching closely. I never imagined I'd apply that knowledge to my own family. But training has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. Vanessa's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her. She nodded once, eyes still forward. Whatever adjustment she was making now, it was happening fast. The judge turned to my attorney. We'll need a clear timeline, she said. Authority access and transfers. Of course, he replied. We've prepared one. Vanessa's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair, just briefly. That reaction told me more than any speech. Confidence shifts when timelines enter the room. Stories can stretch. Dates cannot. When I was deployed, I learned to trust documentation over memory. Memory bends under pressure. Documentation doesn't care who you are or how convincing you sound. Vanessa had built her case on narrative. Years of repetition had reinforced it. She stayed. I left. Therefore, she decided. What she didn't account for was how well I understood systems that punish assumptions. How comfortable I was letting people talk themselves into corners while the paperwork waited patiently. The judge flipped another page, this one thicker, heavier. She paused longer here, scanning lines, then checking a date against another document. Vanessa leaned back again, attempting casual confidence, but her foot tapped once against the floor before she stopped it. I watched the judge's pen underline something. Just one line, in uniform that usually meant attention required. My attorney closed his notebook quietly. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The structure I trusted was doing what it always did when enough information was finally on the table. The judge set her pen down and asked for clarification on a date. Vanessa answered quickly, a little too quickly, then corrected herself by a week. It sounded minor. It wasn't. Dates don't move unless something else is trying to. Power doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in under excuses. It borrows urgency. It wears practicality like a uniform. By the time anyone thinks to ask for credentials, it's already signing documents. When our parents' health started to falter, the shift felt natural. Appointments multiplied. Forms arrived in stacks. Decisions came with deadlines. Vanessa was there to receive all of it. I was not. I was on a schedule that didn't bend for family emergencies, and that reality gave her a head start she never let go of. She called it helping, then handling, then managing. Each word replaced the last, quietly upgrading her role without ever announcing the change. "Mom's tired," she told me once. "I'll just take care of the paperwork." Paperwork is never just paperwork. It's access, it's authority, it's the difference between observing and acting. The first formal step came wrapped in concern. A power of attorney, limited and temporary, just in case, she said. It would make things easier with doctors, banks, vendors. It would avoid delays. It would reduce stress. She emphasized that it didn't change ownership. It didn't change rights. It just made things efficient. Efficiency is persuasive. It sounds responsible. I asked for a copy. She sent it the same day. Clean, proper, narrow in scope, on paper. What she didn't say was how quickly temporary arrangements become permanent habits. How often people forget to revisit documents once the crisis they were designed for fades into routine. With authority came access. With access came discretion. And with discretion came decisions that didn't require consensus. Vanessa began signing contracts I'd never seen before. Renewals, adjustments, small expansions framed as necessary responses to market pressure. Nothing dramatic, nothing that raised alarms on its own. She didn't hide what she was doing. She normalized it. Someone had to sign, she'd say. We couldn't wait. Waiting in her version of events was always irresponsible. I noticed the language changing before I noticed the behavior. She stopped saying we and started saying I. I handled it. I approved it. I decided. The shift was subtle, but once it appeared, it spread. Our parents deferred more often. Not because they were incapable, but because deferring was easier than engaging. Vanessa had answers ready. She spoke confidently. She framed alternatives as risks. I don't want to burden you, she'd tell them. I've got it. Burden is a powerful word. It makes people step back even when they shouldn't. From a distance, everything still looked functional. Revenue continued. Bills were paid. The surface remained calm. That's how power consolidates best. Quietly, without breaking anything obvious. Back in the courtroom, the judge asked about that period specifically, when the power of attorney was signed, when it was activated, when decisions began to be made under its authority. Vanessa recited the timeline smoothly. She had rehearsed it. But rehearsed stories have seams. They rely on memory, not verification. And during this time, the judge asked, were there any limitations placed on your authority? Vanessa hesitated. It was understood, she said, that I would act in the family's best interest. Understood is not a limitation. It's a placeholder for accountability. My attorney leaned forward slightly. Your Honor, he said, we'd like to note that the power of attorney in question was explicitly limited in scope and duration. Vanessa's attorney shifted in his chair. The word limited landed differently when spoken aloud. The judge nodded and made a note. Outside the courtroom, during a brief pause, Vanessa turned to me again. Her voice dropped controlled. You could have stayed, she said. You chose not to. Don't act surprised that things moved on without you. She said moved on like it was neutral. Like movement didn't have direction. I didn't abandon anything, I replied. I trusted you, she scoffed softly. That was your mistake. Trust is not a mistake. It's a condition. What follows determines whether it was deserved. When the hearing resumed, the focus narrowed. Less narrative, more specifics. Bank access, signature authority, transfer approvals. The judge asked questions that required yes or no answers. Vanessa answered most of them. Some she deferred to her attorney. Each deferral chipped away at the image of absolute control she'd built. I remembered the first time I realized something had shifted beyond convenience. I'd asked for a detailed statement related to a vendor payment. Vanessa sent a summary instead. Why not the full statement, I asked. It's complicated, she said. You wouldn't want to dig through all that. That was the moment I understood that access was being filtered. Not denied outright, curated. In the military, that's a red flag. Information doesn't get simplified unless someone is trying to guide your conclusion. The judge requested copies of the original authorization documents. The bailiff collected another folder. Vanessa's confidence wavered just enough to notice. Not panic, calculation. Authority without oversight feels safe until oversight appears. Vanessa had grown accustomed to acting without challenge. Years of being the default decision-maker had trained her to expect agreement, or at least acquiescence. She mistook silence for consent, distance for disinterest. She didn't consider that my silence was habit, not surrender. That distance had given me perspective, not detachment. The judge compared dates again. One document overlapped another by weeks. The power of attorney had expired before a transaction was approved. Vanessa leaned toward her attorney and whispered. He frowned, then nodded. Your Honor, he said, standing, we may need a moment to review that. The judge agreed and called for a short recess. People stood, chairs scraped. Conversations sparked in hushed tones. Vanessa didn't look at me this time. She stared straight ahead, jaw set, already recalibrating. She had built her authority on momentum. Momentum works until it hits resistance. I remained seated, hands folded, watching the empty bench. Power shifts don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves in margins, footnotes, expiration dates. When the judge returned, she didn't sit immediately. She scanned the room, then the documents, then spoke with measured clarity. We're going to need to examine the scope of authority exercised during this period very carefully, she said. Vanessa exhaled, slow and controlled. The room felt smaller now, not because of tension, but because assumptions were being replaced with records. The judge's words lingered in the air longer than she intended, and I felt it settle into the room like weight. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened, then relaxed, a controlled reset. She was good at that. She'd practiced it for years, but control takes effort, and effort leaves traces. Coming home had never felt like reclaiming anything. It felt like stepping into a space that had been rearranged without your consent. Familiar walls, unfamiliar rules. I noticed it the moment I parked in the driveway that first night back. My car sat where it always had, but the house felt different. Quieter but not peaceful. Quiet in the way offices get after hours when decisions have already been made. Vanessa greeted me with a hug that didn't quite land. Polite, efficient, the kind you give someone you don't want questions from. You're just in time, she said. We've been handling a lot. Handling, that word again. Inside, the kitchen table was covered in folders, color-coded, labeled, organized in a way that looked impressive from a distance. I asked what they were. Just paperwork, she said. Nothing you need to worry about. That was when I noticed my name missing. Not on the folders, not on the labels, not on the stack of mail sorted by priority. It was subtle, but absence always is. The next morning, I asked for access to the business accounts. Not because I suspected anything yet, because access is normal when ownership is shared. Vanessa didn't say no. She smiled. I'll send you what you need, she said. She sent summaries, charts, bullet points. What she didn't send were login credentials. When I asked again more directly, she leaned back and folded her arms. You've been gone, she said. It's complicated now. Complicated is another placeholder. It sounds like a reason without being one. I tried once more later that week. This time, she didn't bother softening it. I don't think it makes sense to disrupt things, she said. You wouldn't even know where to start. That was the moment the ground shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to alarm anyone else, just enough for me to stop assuming I was still standing on it. Back in the courtroom, the judge asked about access, whether both parties had equal ability to review records during the period in question. Vanessa answered quickly. I provided everything that was requested. She didn't specify what was requested, or what was provided. My attorney stood. Your Honor, we have documented requests for full account access that were never fulfilled. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me, sharp, calculating. At home, the pattern continued. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were announced after the fact. Vanessa spoke about plans like they were already finalized, because to her they were. When I pushed back, she reframed. You don't understand the pressure, she said. You weren't here. Presence again. Her favorite justification. I thought about the pressure I understood. The kind that comes with deadlines that don't move, with budgets that can't absorb mistakes, with accountability that doesn't care who stayed late or who meant well. Pressure doesn't excuse overreach. It exposes it. The more I asked, the more defensive she became. Not angry, defensive. That distinction mattered. "Why are you doing this now?" she asked one night. "Why can't you just trust me?" Trust doesn't survive when it's demanded. It survives when it's reinforced. The judge asked Vanessa to clarify the scope of decisions she made independently. Vanessa listed them confidently: vendor contracts, staffing adjustments, asset management, strategic planning. "And were these decisions reviewed by anyone else?" the judge asked. Vanessa hesitated. They didn't need to be. That answer landed harder than she expected. In my world, decisions that don't need review usually aren't legitimate, or they're mistakes waiting to be discovered. At home, I started noticing things I hadn't before, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. The way expenses were categorized, the way timelines overlapped, the way certain approvals clustered around moments when authority was least clear. I asked for original statements again. This time, Vanessa's patience cracked. "You're acting like I did something wrong," she said. "I'm acting like I want to understand," I replied. She laughed short and sharp. "You always were like this, always needing proof." She meant it as an insult. I took it as confirmation. In the courtroom, the judge requested additional documentation, originals, not summaries. Vanessa's attorney objected lightly, then withdrew. The judge wasn't interested in resistance. "Transparency benefits everyone," she said. Vanessa nodded, but the nod was tight. That night, after another conversation that went nowhere, I sat alone in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, not angry, focused. The kind of focus that comes when something finally makes sense. Vanessa hadn't just stepped into responsibility. She'd closed the door behind her. I opened my laptop and began listing what I knew for certain: dates, names, documents I'd seen, documents I hadn't. The gaps stood out immediately, not dramatic gaps, administrative ones, the kind that don't raise alarms until someone compares versions. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. Accusations give people something to argue against. Instead, I observed. The judge asked one final question before moving on. "Ms. Turner," she said to Vanessa, "at any point did you formally notify your sister that her access or authority had changed?" Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. "We had conversations," she said finally. "Conversations are not notices. They don't leave records." The judge wrote something down and set her pen aside. In the room, the temperature hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. What had once felt like a story about effort now felt like a process under review. Vanessa sensed it too. Her confidence hadn't disappeared, but it had lost its ease. At home, I closed my laptop and made a decision that didn't require permission. I stopped trying to reinsert myself into a structure that no longer wanted me visible. Instead, I started mapping it. Power reveals itself most clearly when it thinks it's unchallenged. The judge moved on to the next item without comment, and that silence told me enough. Silence, when it follows a precise question, isn't neutral. It's a placeholder for scrutiny. At home, scrutiny began with something small. It usually does. Not a missing account, not a dramatic transfer, just a number that didn't sit right. I was reviewing a summary Vanessa had sent one of her clean, well-labeled spreadsheets. Revenue looked steady, expenses looked reasonable, too reasonable. One vendor payment caught my eye not because it was large, but because it repeated at irregular intervals. Same amount, same memo, different dates. I pulled the previous year's summary and lined them up. The pattern didn't match the business cycle. It didn't match any contract I remembered. It matched convenience. I asked Vanessa about it over dinner. Casually, no edge. "Oh, that," she said, barely looking up. "That's just a holding account. It smooths things out." Smoothing is another word people use when they don't want to explain movement. "Can I see the agreement?" I asked. She smiled, the patient smile she used when she wanted to look generous. "It's standard. You wouldn't find it interesting. Interest isn't the point. Verification is. I didn't push. Pushing creates friction. Friction creates resistance. Resistance makes people careful. I didn't want careful yet." In the courtroom, my attorney asked permission to submit additional exhibits related to financial flow. The judge granted it. Vanessa's attorney objected, then withdrew again. He was watching the same pattern I was. Back home, I started pulling what I could without asking. Public filings, vendor registrations, old contracts saved to a shared drive Vanessa hadn't thought to lock down. Nothing invasive, nothing improper, just pieces of a picture that had never been assembled in one place. The holding account wasn't a holding account. It was a pass-through. Funds moved in, sat briefly, then moved again. Not illegal on its own, Not suspicious in isolation, suspicious in sequence. I noted the dates, cross-referenced them with authority periods. 2 transfers occurred after the power of attorney expired. I didn't react. I logged it. The next red flag came from payroll. An adjustment marked as a temporary measure had become permanent. The adjustment benefited a role that didn't appear on any organizational chart I could find. I asked Vanessa about that one too. Still calm, that's for consulting, she said. Short-term support. How short-term, I asked. She shrugged. As long as we need it. Need is subjective. Payroll isn't. In the courtroom, the judge asked Vanessa whether any third parties had been compensated outside standard payroll. Vanessa answered yes, citing consultants. The judge asked for names and durations. Vanessa listed them. One name was familiar. At home, I pulled bank statements from a period when our parents' health had sharply declined. Expenses rose predictably. Medical, travel, support services. But one category grew faster than the rest, quietly. Administrative costs. A broad label, a flexible one. I remembered something my first supervisor told me during training. If you can't explain a category in one sentence, it's hiding something. Administrative costs covered a lot of ground. Too much ground. I asked for invoices. Vanessa sent 2. There should have been more. Those are the main ones, she said. The rest are minor. Minor expenses don't cluster. They scatter. I started building a simple timeline. No commentary, no assumptions, just dates, amounts, authorizations. The picture didn't scream misconduct. It whispered inconsistency. In the courtroom, the judge paused the proceedings to review a particular set of transfers. She asked Vanessa to explain the rationale for moving funds through an intermediary account. Vanessa spoke confidently. Efficiency, cash flow management, industry practice. The judge asked for documentation supporting that practice. Vanessa's attorney leaned in. They whispered. Vanessa nodded, then answered that she would need to retrieve those documents. The judge granted time. At home, I checked something I'd overlooked before. Tax filings. Not the returns themselves, but the schedules attached to them. The ones most people skim. Line items didn't reconcile cleanly with the summaries Vanessa provided. Not by much. Enough. I remembered another lesson. Fraud rarely lives in round numbers. It lives in margins. I didn't accuse her. Accusations make people defensive. Defensive people tighten controls. Tight controls hide patterns. Instead, I asked a different question. Who prepares the tax schedules now, I asked. Vanessa hesitated. The accountant. Which one? She named someone I didn't recognize. I looked him up later. He existed. Barely. New license. Short history. No prior relationship with the business. That didn't mean anything on its own. It meant something in context. In the courtroom, my attorney introduced a chart. Clean, simple. A timeline of authority versus transactions. The judge studied it quietly. Vanessa's attorney objected to its interpretation. The judge overruled him. This is not interpretation, she said. It's sequencing. Sequencing changes everything. At home, I realized something else. Vanessa hadn't cut me out completely. She'd given me just enough information to stay comfortable. Just enough to discourage deeper questions. That wasn't carelessness. It was design. I stopped asking for summaries. I asked for originals. She stalled. I'll get them to you, she said. It takes time. Time works both ways. In the courtroom, the judge asked whether Vanessa had ever disclosed limitations or expirations of her authority to third parties. Vanessa answered no. That's not typically required, she said. The judge didn't respond immediately. She wrote something down instead. At home, I compared the timing of certain transfers with moments of urgency Vanessa had described. Emergency repairs, time-sensitive decisions, vendor deadlines. The dates didn't line up. The urgency came after the movement, not before. That's another pattern, urgency used retroactively. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Not angry, not surprised. Focused. The first red flags weren't proof of wrongdoing, they were proof of control. Control exercised quietly, without review, without expiration. In my line of work, that's where investigations begin. In the courtroom, the judge set the chart aside and looked directly at Vanessa. We will need a full accounting of these transactions, she said, with supporting documentation. Vanessa nodded, composed but tense. I recognize that posture. It's the posture people take when they realize the questions are no longer optional. At home, I opened a new file and titled it with a single word: balance. Then I added the first entry, and moved on to the next. I didn't feel a rush when I named the file, just a sense of order returning. Balance wasn't about revenge. It was about alignment. Numbers don't need motives. They just need to be placed correctly. I worked the way I always had, quietly, methodically, one source at a time. I started with what couldn't be altered easily: public records, tax filings, vendor registrations, bank statements I had legitimate access to as a beneficiary and partial owner. Each document went into its own folder. Each entry got a date, an origin, and a reference number. No conclusions, no highlights, just facts. The first timeline took shape faster than I expected. Authority periods on one axis, transactions on the other. The overlap was where things got interesting. Transfers approved after authorization expired. Contracts signed under titles that no longer applied. Decisions made without the required co-signature. None of it was dramatic. That was the problem. If Vanessa had emptied accounts or disappeared funds, this would have been simple. She hadn't. She'd moved money in ways that looked responsible unless you tracked sequence and scope. She relied on the assumption that no one would. I remembered something a senior auditor once told me. Most people don't get caught because they steal. They get caught because they keep going. Vanessa kept going. I compared summaries she'd sent me to original statements I pulled directly. The differences were small: a rounding here, a category shift there, enough to keep totals consistent while details drifted. I created a third timeline just for adjustments, every change that didn't correspond to an external event. No vendor change, no contract update, no market shift, just internal decisions. Patterns began to emerge, not in amounts but in timing. Adjustments clustered around moments when oversight was weakest, when authority was assumed not confirmed, when our parents were unavailable, when I was deployed. Back in the courtroom, the judge asked my attorney to clarify the methodology behind the exhibits. He explained it plainly: no accusations, no adjectives, just process. We aligned authority with action, he said, and noted deviations. Vanessa listened, her expression carefully neutral. Her attorney whispered occasionally. She nodded. She was still playing defense through confidence. At home, I added payroll records to the file. I didn't need full access to notice trends. Certain compensation adjustments corresponded with consulting fees paid to entities with limited histories. I traced those entities through registrations. 2 were linked by address. That didn't prove anything. It narrowed focus. I reached out to the previous accountant, the one who'd handled filings years earlier. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. When did his role end? Why? Who replaced him? Vanessa said she wanted to streamline, he told me. Said it would be simpler with someone local. Local was true. So was inexperienced. I logged the conversation and requested confirmation by email. He sent it without hesitation. The file grew heavier, not in size, in clarity. Vanessa noticed the change in me. I stopped asking questions that could be deflected. I stopped reacting to reassurances. When she spoke, I listened without responding. Silence unsettles people who rely on narrative. You're being distant, she said one evening. This is still family. Family doesn't exempt anyone from accountability. It complicates it. In the courtroom, the judge asked whether any independent review had occurred during the period of expanded authority. Vanessa answered no. Her voice didn't waver, but her phrasing shifted. She used qualifiers now, mostly, generally, as needed. Those words don't survive documentation. I encountered my first real obstacle when I hit a missing document. A contract referenced in multiple transactions that wasn't stored anywhere I could access. I asked for it directly. Vanessa didn't refuse. She delayed. It's archived, she said. I'll have to dig it up. I waited. The delay stretched. Days passed. I made a note. In the military, missing paperwork doesn't stop an investigation. It redirects it. I reconstructed the contract's existence through payment schedules and approval chains. The terms didn't need to be known to identify violations of authority. The absence became its own data point. In court, my attorney introduced a supplemental chart. Same format, additional layer. The judge studied it longer than the others. Vanessa's attorney objected again. The objection was procedural. The judge overruled it. This goes to scope, she said. Scope was the word Vanessa had avoided. At home, I added a section to the file labeled deviations, not accusations. Deviations. Every instance where behavior exceeded authority, timing, or disclosure requirements. The list wasn't long, it didn't need to be. Vanessa tried a different approach. She softened. I know you think you're doing the right thing, she said, but you're overthinking this. Overthinking is what people say when they want you to stop verifying. I'm documenting, I replied. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You always were like this, turning everything into a project. Projects end, records don't. In the courtroom, the judge requested a brief recess to review materials. When she returned, her tone had shifted. Still calm, more precise. We're going to proceed carefully, she said. There are several areas that require clarification. Vanessa nodded. She was running out of narrative space. I felt it then. Not satisfaction, alignment. The pieces were no longer floating. They were locking together. I checked my file one last time that night. Everything was labeled, sourced, cross-referenced. Nothing relied on memory or interpretation. It could stand without me in the room. That's when I knew the file was finished. Not complete, finished. Finished doesn't mean final, it means ready. Back in the courtroom, the judge looked down at the documents again, then up at Vanessa. We will need full transparency moving forward, she said. Vanessa agreed, quickly. I recognized that response too. Agreement offered when options narrow. I closed my laptop and slid it into my bag. I didn't need to review the file anymore. It would speak on its own. In my experience, once records begin speaking, people stop interrupting. The judge's request for transparency changed the temperature of the room. Not dramatically, subtly. Vanessa felt it before she admitted it. People who live by momentum always do. When momentum slows, they call it unfair. At home, she stopped pretending everything was normal. The updates stopped. The casual reassurances disappeared. She shifted to a different tone, one I recognized from briefing rooms and closed-door meetings. Controlled, measured, defensive without admitting it. We should talk, she said one night. Just the two of us. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. I let the silence sit until she filled it. I don't want this to get ugly, she continued. There's no reason to drag outsiders into family business. Outsiders was her word for anyone who asked questions she couldn't redirect. I'm not dragging anyone, I said. I'm responding, she frowned, to what I didn't answer. You don't reveal your position when the other side is still guessing. In the courtroom, my attorney leaned over and spoke quietly. We're going to let her keep talking, he said. The more she explains, the clearer the record becomes. I nodded. That approach felt familiar. In training, we called it controlled exposure. You don't interrupt a process that's documenting itself. Vanessa's attorney asked for a meeting, off the record, just to clarify expectations. My attorney declined politely. Clarification happens in writing, not whispers. At home, Vanessa tried a different angle. Guilt. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Mom, she asked. All this stress. Stress is a convenient shield. It implies responsibility without accountability. I'm not creating stress, I said. I'm responding to decisions. She shook her head. You don't get it. This is bigger than numbers. Numbers don't get smaller when you ignore them. In court, Vanessa continued to frame herself as the stabilizing force. She emphasized urgency, crisis management, the burden of being present when no one else was. The judge listened, asked clarifying questions, and noted answers without reaction. Reaction is not validation. My attorney followed the same rhythm. He didn't counter emotionally. He placed documents into the record. At moments when Vanessa's statements created contrast, not confrontation. Contrast. That was the strategy. Let narrative build. Let records dismantle it. At home, I stopped engaging emotionally altogether. No reassurance, no confrontation. When Vanessa spoke, I listened. When she asked questions, I answered factually. When she made accusations, I didn't respond. She didn't know what to do with that. You're acting like this is some kind of operation, she said. I almost smiled. Almost. In the military, strategy isn't about force. It's about timing. You don't reveal your capabilities until the environment requires them. You don't interrupt your opponent when they're making mistakes. The judge scheduled additional review sessions. Requests went out for documentation. Deadlines were set. Vanessa complied quickly at first, then more slowly. Each delay became a note in the margin. At home, I received an email from a vendor I'd contacted weeks earlier. He confirmed payment dates and authorization instructions. His recollection differed from Vanessa's summary. I forwarded the email to my attorney. He added it to the file without comment. Vanessa sensed the shift. She tried to reassert control by offering compromises. We can split things, she said. No need to go through all this. Split implies negotiation. Negotiation implies equal positions. I'm not negotiating, I replied. I'm documenting. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. In court, her attorney suggested mediation. The judge considered it, then declined for now. Too many unresolved questions. Too much documentation still under review. Mediation comes after clarity, not before. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and exhaled sharply. Frustration slipped through, just for a second. That was the cost of the strategy. Patience forces impatience into the open. At home, I received a call from my former commanding officer. Not to intervene, just to check in. He knew enough to ask the right questions without details. You're doing the right thing, he said. Stick to process. Process protects people who don't need to raise their voice. Vanessa tried one last tactic. Minimization. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said. It's just paperwork. Paperwork is where proportion lives. In the courtroom, my attorney asked a simple question. Ms. Turner, can you point to a document where you disclose these limitations to your sister? Vanessa paused. She looked at her attorney. He said nothing. No, she said finally. The judge wrote something down. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt alignment. Strategy doesn't produce emotion. It produces clarity. At home, I reorganized my file one final time. Not because it needed it, but because order calms the mind. Everything was in place. Every document sourced. Every timeline verified. The strategy wasn't about winning quickly. It was about letting the system do what it does best when it's given complete information. Vanessa had built her control on speed, urgency, and narrative. I built mine on patience, sequence, and proof. In my experience, those two approaches don't coexist for long. In the courtroom, the judge closed her folder and looked up. We'll proceed with a structured review, she said, one step at a time. Vanessa nodded, but her eyes flicked toward me again, searching for something she could still influence. I met her gaze, calm and unresponsive. Strategy doesn't announce itself. It just narrows the field until movement becomes impossible without consequence. The judge called the room to order, and the murmurs settled into a clean, expectant quiet. Vanessa straightened, smoothed the front of her blazer, and stood as if she'd been waiting for this cue all morning. Confidence came easily to her when the floor was hers. She began the way she always did, with context that sounded generous. Years of responsibility, long days, hard choices. She spoke about staying when others left, about carrying weight no one else wanted. She didn't look at me while she spoke. She addressed the judge, the room, the idea of fairness she'd been rehearsing for years. I didn't seek control, she said. I stepped up. Stepping up is an appealing phrase. It frames action as virtue without specifying limits. She described the business like a living thing she'd kept alive through storms. Vendors who needed reassurance. Employees who needed stability. Parents who needed someone reliable. Her voice stayed steady, measured, the cadence of someone used to being believed. When she mentioned me, it was brief and careful. No insults, no overt blame. My sister served honorably, she said. But service took her elsewhere. Decisions still had to be made. She let that sentence breathe. It was the hinge of her story. The judge asked a question about timing. Vanessa answered without hesitation, citing months and years with ease. She had memorized the narrative. The problem with memorized narratives is that they assume no one will test them against records. Vanessa's attorney followed up, reinforcing her points. He spoke about reasonableness, about implied consent, about family dynamics that don't fit neatly into forms. The judge listened, occasionally jotting a note. Her expression didn't change. When it was my attorney's turn to ask questions, he didn't challenge the story directly. He asked Vanessa to clarify details: who authorized what, when authority began and ended, how decisions were communicated. Vanessa answered quickly at first, then more slowly. Yes, I made those decisions, she said. Because there was no time to wait. No time, my attorney repeated gently. And you informed your sister of those decisions, Vanessa nodded. I kept her updated. Updated, he said again. Through summaries, yes, not originals. That wasn't necessary. Necessity is not the same as compliance, the judge interjected. Ms. Turner, when your authority was limited, how did you ensure decisions remained within scope? Vanessa's answer came a half-second later than before. I acted in good faith. Good faith is not a control mechanism. She continued, describing intent rather than process. The room absorbed it quietly. Intent fills space. Process fills records. I watched the judge's pen pause over a line, then underline it. Vanessa leaned into her confidence again, sensing she needed to reclaim momentum. She spoke about trust, about how families don't operate like corporations, about how requiring constant oversight would have paralyzed the business. No one complained, she said. Everything kept moving. Movement is not validation. My attorney asked her to confirm the expiration date of the power of attorney. She did, correctly. He asked whether any transactions occurred after that date. She hesitated, then acknowledged that some routine matters continued. Routine, he said. Even without authority, Vanessa frowned. Authority doesn't just disappear overnight, it does on paper. The judge asked to see the document again. The bailiff handed it up. The judge scanned the dates, then looked at Vanessa. Ms. Turner, she said, authority does in fact end on the date specified. Vanessa nodded a tight professional nod. Understood. Understood now is different from understood then. She tried to pivot. Those actions were in continuity with prior approvals. Continuity doesn't override expiration. My attorney thanked her and returned to his seat. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He let the answers sit where they landed. Vanessa took the opportunity to reassert control. She spoke again, emphasizing outcomes. The business survived. Jobs were preserved. No one suffered harm. Harm isn't always immediate, my attorney said calmly. The judge raised a hand, signaling for order. She asked Vanessa one more question. Did you ever formally notify your sister that her access or authority had changed? Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. She adjusted her posture. We had conversations, she said. The judge nodded and wrote something down. The hearing continued in this rhythm. Vanessa spoke. My attorney asked. The judge listened. Each answer added texture. Each clarification narrowed interpretation. Vanessa's confidence didn't vanish. It evolved. She became more careful with phrasing, less absolute, more conditional. I noticed her attorney stop whispering. He sat back, arms crossed, listening now. When lawyers stop coaching, it's because coaching no longer helps. The judge asked for a brief explanation of the holding account. Vanessa repeated the efficiency argument. The judge asked for documentation supporting that practice. Vanessa deferred. We can provide that, she said. The judge nodded. Please do. In my experience, that phrase carries weight. It's not a suggestion. Vanessa glanced at me, then searching for something. Approval, reaction, doubt. I gave her none. The hearing moved to third-party payments, consultants, services, durations. Vanessa answered, but her answers lost their earlier flow. The names sounded less familiar now that they were being examined. My attorney introduced an email from a vendor. The judge read it, compared it to a summary, made a note. Vanessa shifted again. Not much. Enough. The judge leaned back slightly. We'll take a short pause, she said. People stood. The room exhaled. Vanessa stepped aside with her attorney, speaking in low tones. I remained seated. Stillness is useful when the environment is changing. When the judge returned, her questions were more pointed. Less narrative, more verification. We'll proceed with a structured review of transactions during the disputed period, she said, starting with those executed after authority lapsed. Vanessa nodded. She didn't argue. Arguing now would have sounded defensive. I felt the room settle into a different posture, not suspense, direction. The hearing had stopped being about who worked harder or who stayed longer. It had become about alignment between permission and action. Vanessa still believed she could talk her way through it. I could tell by the way she adjusted her jacket before answering the next question, but talk only carries you so far when the room is listening for something else. The judge called the next item, and the clerk passed up another stack of documents. The paper made a soft sound as it landed, heavier than the last. I watched the judge's eyes move across the page, slower this time, more deliberate. Confidence thrives on momentum. Records thrive on patience. The room was learning which one would set the pace. The stack of documents landed with a dull thud, and the sound carried farther than any raised voice. Paper has weight when it's earned. The judge didn't rush. She adjusted her glasses and began reading, not skimming, not scanning, but reading the way people do when they expect the details to matter. Vanessa sat straight, her hands folded, chin lifted. She looked composed, but her breathing had changed. Slower on the inhale, sharper on the exhale. I'd seen that pattern before in briefing rooms, right before someone realized the room wasn't theirs anymore. My attorney stood and spoke quietly. Your Honor, the records before you align authority periods with transaction dates. We're not disputing effort or intent. We're showing sequence. Sequence is a difficult thing to argue with. The judge nodded once and continued. She turned a page, then another. Her pen paused, tapped lightly against the margin, then made a short underline. Vanessa watched the movement like it was a verdict. The first item was straightforward. A transfer authorized 3 weeks after the power of attorney expired. Routine, Vanessa had said. Continuity. The judge circled the date and wrote a note. Ms. Turner, she said. Looking up, can you explain why this transfer was approved after your authority lapsed? Vanessa answered quickly. It was already in motion. Delaying it would have caused disruption. Do you have documentation indicating prior approval? The judge asked. Vanessa glanced at her attorney. He remained silent. I don't have it with me, Vanessa said. The judge wrote again. The next item followed the same pattern. Different vendor, similar timing. Approval date after authority ended. Vanessa's explanations shifted slightly. Urgency, practicality, best interest. Best interest isn't a substitute for permission. My attorney didn't interrupt. He let the sequence speak. He introduced a chart showing the overlap between expired authority and continued action. Clean lines, no commentary. The judge studied it longer than anything else so far. Vanessa's attorney stood. Your Honor, these were minor administrative actions. No harm resulted. The judge looked at him. Harm is not the threshold for authority, she said. Compliance is. Vanessa's confidence flickered. Just a fraction. The judge moved on to payroll adjustments. She compared summaries to originals, numbers matched at the top line, drifted beneath. Adjustments that had been described as temporary, extended for months. Who approved this continuation? The judge asked. I did, Vanessa said. Under what authority? The judge asked. Vanessa hesitated. It was consistent with prior approvals. Consistency doesn't extend authority. The judge turned to my attorney. When did your client become aware of these adjustments? He answered calmly. After requesting originals that were not initially provided. The judge nodded. Next came the consulting payments. Entities with short histories. Overlapping addresses. Payments labeled administrative. The judge compared dates to tax schedules. Ms. Turner, she said, were these relationships disclosed to your sister at the time? Vanessa shook her head. They didn't seem relevant. Relevance isn't discretionary when ownership is shared. The judge made another note. Vanessa leaned back slightly, trying to regain ease. She crossed her legs, uncrossed them, then folded her hands again. She was managing her body now, not the room. My attorney introduced the vendor email. The judge read it, then looked at Vanessa. This vendor indicates authorization instructions that differ from your summary, she said. Can you explain the discrepancy? Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She tried again. There may have been a misunderstanding, she said. The judge didn't respond immediately. She compared the email to the summary, then to the bank statement. This is not a misunderstanding, she said finally. It's a difference. Differences accumulate. The room felt tighter, not tense, but focused. Conversation stopped. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter. The judge was no longer gathering context. She was verifying. Vanessa's attorney attempted to redirect, emphasizing outcomes again. Stability, continuity, no losses. The judge shook her head slightly. This proceeding is not about outcomes, she said. It's about authority exercised beyond scope. Beyond scope. The phrase landed and stayed. She turned another page. This one took longer. Her pen moved slowly, underlining 2 separate entries, then drawing a bracket between them. These transactions, she said, occurred after expiration and without co-authorization. They were not disclosed contemporaneously. Vanessa's jaw tightened. My attorney spoke again. Your Honor, we're not alleging intent. We're establishing pattern. Pattern is where records become narrative proof. The judge looked up. I see the pattern, she said. Vanessa exhaled sharply before she could stop herself. The judge addressed her directly. Ms. Turner, do you dispute the dates on these records? Vanessa said. Do you dispute the scope of authority as written? No. Do you dispute that these actions occurred after expiration? Vanessa hesitated, then said, No. The judge nodded. Thank you. Silence followed. Not awkward, decisive. The judge requested a recess to review the remaining materials. When she returned, her posture had changed. Less listening, more direction. "We will proceed with corrective measures," she said. "Certain transactions will require reversal or adjustment, pending further review." Vanessa's attorney stood, then sat back down. There was nothing to add. The judge continued. "Additionally, the court will consider whether fiduciary duties were breached during this period. Fiduciary duty is not an emotional concept. It's structural. It either holds or it doesn't." Vanessa looked at me, then really looked, as if trying to reconcile the quiet person in front of her with the documents on the table. She had mistaken my silence for absence. She had mistaken distance for disengagement. The judge asked for a plan to ensure transparency moving forward. My attorney outlined it simply. Joint access, independent review, clear boundaries. The judge approved it. Vanessa nodded along the way people do when agreement is no longer optional. The clerk called the next item. Another document, another date, another sequence. The hearing had shifted fully now. No more speeches, no more framing, just records moving through the system they were built for. I didn't feel triumph, I felt alignment. This was how processes were supposed to work when information was complete. The judge closed one folder and opened another. She glanced at the clock, then back at the page. "We'll continue," she said. Vanessa adjusted her blazer again, slower this time. The confidence replaced by calculation. The room no longer belonged to her story. It belonged to the record. The judge's voice stayed steady as she continued, the tone of someone no longer weighing possibilities but organizing outcomes. The room followed her lead. No one interrupted. No one rushed. This was no longer a debate. It was a process completing itself. She outlined the corrective steps with precision. Transactions executed outside valid authority would be unwound where possible. Others would be subject to independent review. Oversight would be reestablished immediately with shared access and defined limits. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just structure returning to where it had quietly slipped away. Vanessa listened without comment. She nodded at the appropriate moments, but the movement felt automatic, now detached from belief. The confidence she'd relied on had nowhere to stand. Confidence needs ambiguity. Records remove it. When the judge addressed fiduciary duty, her language sharpened slightly, not in volume but in clarity. "Authority carries obligation," she said. "When that obligation is exceeded, intent is not the deciding factor. Responsibility is." Vanessa's attorney scribbled notes he didn't look at again. The judge turned to me for the first time that day and asked a simple question. "Are you seeking punitive measures?" "No," I said. The word landed cleanly. No hesitation, no explanation. The judge nodded, noted. Vanessa looked at me, then not with anger, but confusion. She'd expected a grab, a counterstrike, something that would confirm the version of me she'd always carried. She didn't know what to do with restraint. The judge continued. "The goal here is restoration, not retribution." Restoration, that was the right word. It wasn't about taking something from Vanessa. It was about putting things back where they belonged. The hearing moved toward its conclusion without ceremony. Orders were issued, deadlines set, oversight assigned. The clerk read them aloud, each item narrowing the space where Vanessa once moved freely. When it was done, the judge gathered her papers and stood. Everyone followed. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt different. The same walls, the same coffee smell, but the tension that had lived there earlier was gone. Not replaced by relief, replaced by quiet. Vanessa stopped a few steps away from the doors. She turned, hesitated, then spoke. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't confident. It sounded tired. "I didn't," I said. "I documented." She shook her head slightly, like she was still trying to reframe it. "You could have just talked to me." "I did," I said. "You answered." She looked away. There was nothing else to say. Conversation implies negotiation. This had never been that. Her attorney touched her elbow and guided her down the hall. She didn't resist. She didn't look back. My attorney packed his files efficiently, the way people do when they know the work is finished. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't need to. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Most people make it harder than it needs to be. Process helps," I said. He smiled once. "It usually does." Outside, the air felt cooler. Not refreshing, just clear. I stood on the steps for a moment, watching people move past, with their own folders, their own versions of urgency. I thought about how easily this could have gone differently. if I'd raised my voice, if I'd accused instead of observed, if I'd demanded instead of documented. None of that would have changed the records. It would have only changed the tone. Vanessa had wanted to take everything, not because she needed it, but because control had become synonymous with survival in her mind. She didn't know how to share authority without feeling diminished. I didn't need to correct that. The system already had. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It never does. Changes happened quietly, bank access adjusted, oversight began, third parties asked questions they'd never asked before. The narrative that had carried Vanessa for years thinned without support. She didn't lose everything. She lost exclusivity. That was harder. At home, the house felt the same and different at once. Same furniture, same rooms, but the tension that had lived in the corners was gone. Decisions no longer arrived fully formed. They arrived as drafts, as discussions, as things that could be reviewed. I didn't take over. I didn't need to. Control wasn't the goal. Balance was. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed a report prepared by the independent auditor. It was thorough, boring, correct. I signed off and forwarded it without comment. Later, I packed my bag for my return to duty. Uniform folded, documents stored, laptop charged, order restored. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. No ceremony, no reflection, just checking locks. Light's the small details that matter when you're responsible for something. At the door, I paused and looked back once. Not out of nostalgia, out of habit. In the military, we're taught early that if something isn't documented, it doesn't exist. That lesson isn't cynical, it's protective. It keeps systems honest, it keeps people accountable. It removes the need for volume. Vanessa had believed presence was power. She stayed, therefore she decided. She never saw the difference between being nearby and being authorized. I didn't need her to understand it now. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a routine notification. Schedule update. Nothing urgent. Life moving forward at a measured pace. That was the real victory. Not the ruling, not the corrections. The quiet return of structure where assumption had lived too long. No one clapped. No one watched. Things simply worked the way they were supposed to. And that was enough.